All right, hello, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to the Currency of Discourse podcast with myself, Jay, and my co-host and good friend, Quaid. We're going to be talking about things on the more macabre side today. As you know, there's been a lot of prominent individuals who have ended their own lives the last few days. And because this is the Currency of Discourse podcast, Quaid and I both see an inherent value in how communication can create positive outcomes in our lives. And we would hope that, if you're experiencing struggles in life, you can find a way to communicate that and not make the decision to, end your own life. And, there have been prominent individuals that ended their own lives, but it's not just them that we should be talking about. It's the ordinary individual. Everyone has value. 22 veterans a day take their own life, and that's unacceptable if someone's going through hard times. So we're gonna try and wrestle with that, and we'll just see where it goes from here.
Yeah, 44,000 U.S. citizens in 2017. It's roughly six people a minute, I think, something like that. And yeah, that's a lot of people, and the rates have gone up since 1999. So I guess it doesn't look like it's getting better. And I was watching a video online that the guy was basically like, there's a lot of different ways to look at mental health issues in America, and you could do it probably all day. But it's clear that we have an issue, I think. And, some people are going to talk about lifestyle habits. Some people are going to talk about genetics. Some people are going to talk about access to healthcare.
Decay of culture.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The inability of society to fulfill our needs and wants.
Mm-hmm.
And all those are going to come into play, but I think the one that we're more interested in here is the communication that happens with suicide, because that is such a large component of that dilemma, and mental health issues in general is communicating mental health issues and talking about them openly because of the stigmas behind them. So there's a lot of ground to be covered in terms of how we get better at communicating about things like suicide.
It's something that I wanted to raise just kind of like up at the top of this podcast is, in terms of communication, one, there's the stigma, the idea around mental health, where people are not comfortable talking about what's really going on with them to other people, whether it's a stranger or someone that they're close to. That stigma exists. And a little background for people who are listening. I've spent a little bit of time working in wilderness therapy. And something that I noticed in my experience in that environment is that it takes a long time for people to become comfortable to really talk about like the underlying things that are going on with them. And if someone's experiencing a moment of crisis, they're feeling suicidal, want to take their own life, to get to the point where they feel comfortable talking with someone else to get that help, it takes so long that they're almost not in a position to feel like they want to do that. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is, I think from an earlier age, we have to get better about strengthening our communication skills and being open with other human beings. I mean, the people who, I don't know the statistic on this one, but individuals who follow through with ending their own life are more than likely to not have said anything to anyone. That's one of the markers of of, that kind of thing. And we have to get better at shaping our society in a way that people feel comfortable coming forward with their struggles, because it doesn't exist right now societally.
Yeah, we have a huge problem with that, and that's a good point too about like age being a factor, because we're not raised in a culture that in which we think everything should be communicated. We're really, there's certain things that are appropriate and not appropriate to communicate in certain social circumstances, and that makes it difficult. That makes it more difficult. So, for instance, like, you might talk about these things with your family, but you don't talk about them with your friends at school. But what if you don't have a family to talk to about it? Well, then that's all you have is what's at school. And so if you're afraid of kids making fun of you or not understanding, you just created a bubble around that person. And if there's not school counselors that can identify with if there's not school counselors, and then also if there's not school counselors that can identify with them, or they're not trained properly, that can be a whole other issue as well.
And for a student, that can be a daunting task just to be seen walking in. If they're struggling with being bullied, or they're going through some kind of a problem with their life, and they're spotted walking into the school psychiatrist's office.
Yeah.
Hey, what are you doing in there, man? And then now he has to deal with that. He or she has to deal with that too.
Yep.
On top of whatever it was before. And, going back to the military, there's this dilemma between people say we want to help. We want to get our veterans help. And not just veterans, active duty. I'm referring to active duty individuals right now here too. There's this thing about, hey, we want to make sure that we're getting people the help that they need. And so they've created these structures to give individuals that help, like on military installations. They have mental health facilities, at the VA that we live close to. There's a mental health facility. If people need to go to it, they can go to it. In the military, if you're an active duty service member, and you go to get mental help, there's that fear that will be a career ender for you. And so you have to make a choice. Do I risk my career, or do I risk my mental health? And if you can't marry those two, if you can't be secure in being able to continue to develop your career, you're not going to go after the help that you really need. I mean, if you determine that that's not the risk that you want to take.
Yeah, and that's a shame too, because I've talked about this with other people. I'm not convinced that there's this large. I'm not convinced that nobody needs therapy, or I'm not convinced that there's a huge segment of the population out there that doesn't need therapy. Just from what I see, it seems like everybody needs somebody to talk to, and everybody needs to understand their mind. If you're not a psychologist or a therapist yourself, there's probably things you're just not going to know. You just didn't have access to the information.
Right.
You're not going to have the same coping strategies, and so that's the real dilemma here, is that there's a certain segment of the population that absolutely needs it, that doesn't want to seek it out because of the stigma. But then there's also a segment of the population that could certainly benefit from it, and it would improve society as a whole if they would go learn, even though they can manage without it, just them being able to optimize their own performance and understanding themselves and how their mind works. But they're not going to go either. And so you get a population of people that really aren't aware mentally of themselves. And then you look at other things going on in the U.S. and you say, like, how much of this is represented by the fact that we really don't understand our own psychology, even up to the current science, like what science knows, and then it becomes more aware that we're just not aware people in general. And so it's going to make things like this more, you're going to expect what we've been saying, essentially.
I sometimes wonder too if, like, the stigma coming from mental, if someone's sick, like they have like a stomach ache, something like that, there's no stigma of going to the doctors to be seen for like physical health. That's not, I wouldn't say that really exists. No one's shamed for going to the doctor if they like broke their ankle or something. But I think because of popular worldviews in the United States, you kind of think of what goes on your mind as almost like your soul, like who you really are. And so to go seek mental health assistance, some people feel like they can't go through that process without admitting that or recognizing that there's something wrong with them at like a soulical level or something.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about too. I feel like a lot of people would understand that. No, I mean, you're right. Like if there's something wrong with your essence at that point. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, in a way that makes sense just because there's so many things of us, our components that are in the brain, like if you chop off an arm, well, that's not you, but if you start cutting away pieces of the brain, you're like, oh shit, some bad stuff's going to happen with that person. Like they're going to change, and so, yeah, on an intuitive level, that's true. But just to deviate just a little bit for the only portion of the podcast I want to do this, because this goes into a whole other thing that I think in terms of people having issues. Like imagine, for instance, having certain urges or psychological disorders in which you're going to harm another person.
Right.
And we've talked about this before. It's just like, what do? Do you go to somebody about it? No, you don't. Because you know what the response is going to be. You're going to be stigmatized, right? And you could never admit to having completely any inappropriate thoughts about children. You could not do that. But then it's just like, well, what is that person going to do? Well, they're going to bottle it up and continue to walk through society. So we end up harming ourselves with this. It's like this double-edged sword where we want to have this visceral reaction to certain mental behaviors, basically mental behaviors, or we get indignant and we feel hatred towards the individual about these things, to the point where we actually end up perpetuating the issue because that person then hides themselves until a lot of times they just end up doing the thing anyway.
Acting out on whatever urge or...
Yeah, whereas if we lived in a society that certainly didn't like those things because they're awful, but didn't pin so much on the individual, and that individual knew like, okay, well, I'll still have a chance to get a job and people won't hate me as much, they're more likely to come out, and get help. So we're all social participants into this, and our lack of communication isn't just their problem, it's our own problem, because we end up perpetuating a system that hurts us and our children sometimes. And so we're all connected in this thing. And yeah.
And I wanted to, now I'm going to kind of shift and make a caveat real quick, and then if you have any thoughts. But I feel like some of the things that I've said already in this podcast, there's an implication that like I envision this society where like everyone overshares everything and they got to talk to everyone about everything that occurs in their life. And I'm not saying that. I do envision a society where societal institutions exist where people can get quality help, and I do envision a society where people's immediate family members have a relationship to where they are able to talk about difficult things and get help from family. I mean,
or community,
or community. Or your friends. Those kinds of things where we are social creatures, and there is something. Working in wilderness therapy, I'm not a therapist, but there's something that spoken word has an effect on people when you share something out loud to another human being. There's something in that process that creates healing for the individual that's speaking. and to have someone to listen to them instead of leaving a thought to sift through your mind. There's something significant to that action that's good for human beings. And so I do envision a world where people can do that and feel okay about it, I guess, and not feel like they're going to be haunted by what they speak.
Well, that is what discourse is. That is what it's the idea that we learn through speaking. And so that's why it's so significant that we talk it out, because articulation is the highest form of consciousness for us. Like, it's when you can say something, it's known that it's understood by that person, right? If they never verbalize it, you can't know that they know for sure. There's certain experiments you could set up, but the most direct way is just always going to be communication, and you don't always know. And so talking with someone in real time kind of gives you this feedback loop where you're in on the process yourself, which is why even talking out loud can help. I mean, that's why they say journaling can help. It's not just even with an individual. It can be by yourself, even though sometimes that's just not good enough. And I've talked about some of these things before in terms of the reason that I like to talk to people about things, because I'm a very open person when it comes to talking about my own issues or my life circumstances or whatever, is that it's just always good to have two brains on something than one. Like, that just makes sense mathematically to me. And I've explained that to other people, and they're like, that makes sense, but I've never thought of it that way. And it's just like, yeah, because like I know people that they're just like, no, I solve my own issues. And I'm like, okay, all right, that's fine. And you're right. Like, you're the only person you can rely on at the end of the day, and you're the one that has to make the choice, and that's true. Yeah. But when two brains are on a problem, you just get more information out of it. It just does not, it's not the logical thing to just handle everything on your own, because that other brain can problem solve in similar ways to your own and spit out things that could be useful to you. So,
yeah, and you can sometimes get to that place where you don't want to share because you've been betrayed. You don't want to speak to someone because you've experienced betrayal in your life, or you've had relationships that aren't healthy. And, the fact of the matter is that a lot of people don't have relationships with other human beings where they can confide in them, if they're trying to seek some kind of help. That doesn't exist for a lot of people. I know at some point we're going to get to talking about Anthony Bourdain, some of the other prominent figures that have hurt themselves, taken their lives over the past couple of days. But, and maybe those apparatuses existed for them. I don't know. But, yeah, it's more complicated than just saying, hey, speak to someone.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist for everybody.
Yeah, for sure. You're actually, really right about that. And that's a really good point. And sometimes people have people to talk to and then they don't, like that happens too. Like, people die, people move away.
Yeah.
So it's not even always as easy as finding a group of people, because things happen to where that you don't have that group anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always problems and dilemmas. But I think that the big thing is that there are always people around. And I think that's also important. And that's the way that I think we should also consider the issue. It's just like, well, your social support group might not be around, but why aren't people good enough? There's something about individuals that you just run into that, like, you don't trust them, or you don't, like, you anticipate negative things. If you didn't, you would do it. And so that, I think that's my issue underlying all this, is that we haven't created a culture of that. Because if we did, then it wouldn't be an issue when somebody dies or when people move away, because you always have people there. So it's really a problem that we can't rely on each other, but we're everywhere. People are everywhere. It's just a matter of the fact that you can't rely on them.
Our communities are not as tightly bound as they used to be. We live closer together, but our relationships are more separated from each other. Neighbors don't need each other to survive. In most American environments, there are still rural areas of the United States where you need your neighbor to help you out every now and then. But by by and large, you don't need your neighbor to survive. And when you do need your neighbor to survive, you develop a bond with them. And, that can open up the ability to speak to them in a way that you feel comfortable with. But what you're saying is interesting. I mean, I can't imagine a world where, you could speak to a stranger about
deep issues that you're
deep
having.
issues and then feel comfortable walking away with them holding, your deep truths in their pocket.
Yeah.
And not knowing what could be done with that.
I could.
And that would be nice.
I could imagine that world, but I just if there's a certain segment of the population, for instance, that's all about they have the suck it up mentality. They don't
pull
care.
up your bootstraps.
Yeah, like
drive
they don't
on.
care, and it's just like you could run into that person. You could be having a really bad day, need somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
Hey man, look, I know I don't know you, but this is something I really need to get off my chest and talk about. And that guy's like, you just need to suck it up and stop whining. And these people are emotional lepers, but they exist, and they're out there.
I wouldn't, I'm going to push back on that a little bit. I feel like that mentality, I think, is a useful mentality for some people. I mean, that's given them the grit to survive and get to where they are in life, is just like, suck it up and drive on. Like, that is a mentality that works for a lot of people. But I don't think it signals a lack of care. I think it signals, look, your problems are still your problems are gonna be here, and you have to move forward while you're dealing with them. It might not be the most sophisticated. Suck it up and drive on might not be the most sophisticated thing in the world, but it is actually useful in certain environments.
Yeah. I guess I just meant more how it's stylized.
Yeah, but it would be nice if you get to a situation where you need to just talk to us, like anybody nearby, like you're in a moment of desperation, and people should be available for a human being who's in a moment of desperation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think your environment determines the choice that, if you're the stranger, that you would make in that moment, because a lot of people in major cities are in moments of desperation, and you walk right past them. And
they will talk to you too. And they do.
Yes.
And they have.
Yes.
Yeah.
That will happen. But that would cause you to have to alter your day, your life, maybe, to like actually help that person.
Yeah, yeah. And then there's also the straight up fear. There's anticipation. You don't know that person, and they're talking about all these. Yeah, exactly. Like, you start to wonder those things. And so it is multifaceted. That's a good point to bring that up too. Yeah, it is. It's a very complex issue, and it's not just one-sided, I guess, is what you get from that.
But if you weren't in a major city and you saw a person like way out in the countryside, like walking by the side of the road that looked messed up, I bet they would be more likely to get help if someone drove by,
Unless they watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre too many times.
Yeah, if they watched that too many times, then they might continue to drive on.
Yeah.
But there would probably be a slight window rolling down and, hey, you all right?
Yeah.
But they're getting too far off course there. With the loss of prominent, like figures in society, when they take their own lives, what is that? Is there symbolism to that for a lot of people? And
for sure. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, I wasn't thinking about it until you said that.
Yeah.
Because I just saw an article online on Facebook that was talking about, I didn't read it, I just saw the headline, but it was like, why are we so attached to people that we don't know? Like, why are we so attached to the suicides of people we don't know? Yeah. I think you probably just hit the nail on the head. Yeah, it's that we're all just like, man, if that dude's sad, like, this is an issue. Like, everybody has it, because I look at Anthony Bourdain, I was telling you, he looks like, you got people like Robin Williams, right? And it's just like, you don't see it coming. But I think the difference for me with those two is that I think that Robin Williams, I could sense a bit of sadness there. He's a very deep person. Like, Robin Williams is a very deep thinker and deep person. Sure. So I assumed that there was something else going on there. But with Anthony Bourdain, I got more of a sense of like life fulfillment out of him. I know he's had a rough life, but he seemed, traveling the world, and he seemed, when you're watching him, to be a more fulfilled person. But now that he's done it, and we also need to talk about the fact that you don't really ever know what's going on there, right? And it could be a million things. It might not have been a social support issue. He might have had all the social support that he wanted to, but there's just a lot of things that are going on behind the scenes that, we don't know about, that could have been occurring and driving that.
Whether it's internal in his mind or external factors in his life.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or both. Like, you can get hit by both at the same time, right?
Yep.
And then,
that's just a concoction.
Where's your hope,
Yeah. I think with Robin Williams, there was speculation, or I guess maybe even just the fact that he had some type of disease or something.
I don't know. It wasn't like dementia. I don't
right.
know if it was Parkinson's, but he was losing his mind.
Yeah.
Which was, his greatest gift.
Yep. So, things like that are scary. So, and so in terms of conversation, I think that can still go a lot of ways, like being able to communicate it. I'm sure he did, though. I'm sure he did communicate it. And maybe we shouldn't see celebrity suicides as the same as individuals, because there might be a lot more going on. Like, they do have more resources, so they do have the people to talk to, and maybe it's not so much communication there. It is just, you get into that conversation about assisted suicide, or suicide for what would be the word, like degenerative issues, essentially.
Terminal illnesses, you mean?
Yeah.
Like if someone has a terminal illness and they want,
basically
euthanize themselves or something.
Well, even not even that, but like if you knew you were going to get dementia and it was going to happen really quickly, even at that point, like I'm talking about severe degenerative disorders or medical conditions, and those are completely different too. To me, those are actually the different ones, because then we need to stop talking about it as a tragedy, but as the best option. Well, I mean, it is still a tragedy, but it's not the same tragedy as someone who could have gotten the help and they just couldn't for whatever reason. And I wanted to loop back to what we were talking about before I was talking about the guy that was just kind of like suck it up, because I think you're right. And again, like at the end of the day, this is what I like to say about things. So people say stop complaining about things, and I don't like that, or stop making excuses, because then you teach people to shut their mouths and keep walking, even when they can't bear it anymore. They have to talk about it. That's why I'm a little against that mindset. I agree with you on the tact. Like, there's a way to say it, and this is what I always tell people. Like, no, make all the excuses you want, but just recognize that, like, what next? Like, you can do that. You can blame your life circumstances. You can blame your parents. So, okay, let's say it's your parents' fault. Okay, now what? So now it's your parents' fault. You know that they dicked you over and they weren't there for you. What do you do now?
You have to take ownership at some point. You can't continue to divert, whatever is happening in your life to some other factor. At some point, there has to be a level of ownership so you can move forward. That's the only way. It's not always might not always explain the entirety, like the truth of the situation, but.
It just depends. I don't know. It's like you can't use it. I don't know. To me, I mean, like if there's a past event, and this might be where I just disagree with a lot of people. If you engage in a certain behavior and you're like, this is why I engaged in that behavior, your guess is just as good as anybody else's as to why you actually did that. That's where we're going to get into a tiff on the free will thing. I know that's probably where that conversation goes. Yeah. For future circumstances, I agree. Like, it's all about what you do now. But if why did I mess that up? Why did I get that wrong? Well, because you have anxiety. Why do you have anxiety? Well, because I was under threat of death all my whole childhood or something like that. It's just like, no, that makes perfect sense. I'm not just going to say, no, you need to take ownership of that incorrect. It's just like, no, you know why you did it, but the question is, how do you avoid it in the future? That's really the only, to me, the important question at that point. And but in terms of the other person and that, I guess to me the difference is there's a mentality of if you think this way, you're weak. And that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
that if you
important.
if you ever if you ever are going through a mentally tough time, you're just weak. It has nothing to do with your circumstances. It has to do with you as a person. And I think that's complete crap, and I think that's where a lot of people will come out and say, you need to suck it up, as opposed to, I understand things are difficult, life's difficult, but what do we do now? That's really, I feel like, is a much more productive mentality to be in than to just call people weak, because then they shut up. That's when they stop talking at that point.
You definitely don't want to refer to someone as weak, because that's not going to get them anywhere. That's like a negative mindset. And so approaching it from that way is not useful for anybody. And you're only just doing someone damage when you use that kind of language. Yeah.
I mean, again, there's a lot to these issues, and I'm also not trying to blame people that respond to things in that way. You were saying earlier that you were talking about how, like, people talk about they question the mentality of being mentally weak or wanting to commit suicide or any of those things, and they're like, just like, how could you do that, or how could you think to do that? It's just, how could you not?
Yeah, it's a Norm Macdonald joke, and the punchline is, and I'm not going to retell the joke, but he's telling a joke about people often feel if someone is suicidal, how they'll ask the question, well, I don't know why someone would ever do that. That's something that you often hear, like, oh, I don't understand why. And Norm Macdonald says, well, how could you not know why? I mean, haven't you lived life at all? I mean, have you lived in a bubble? Like, has everything gone perfectly for you forever?
Some people have.
Yeah, I don't know. That's rare. I mean, if that's true, I mean, some people have got really lucky. If they never experienced a death.
Well, they just haven't experienced anything that's significant enough for them to, or they're lying. I mean, that's another option too.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I'm not saying that doesn't exist. I'm saying that's rare. I mean, so for the average person, you should be able to find something in your life that you can relate to someone and be like, yeah, it makes sense why they did that. Because if you've ever been in despair or experienced darkness, you get it.
Well, I think that just the difference is not that you don't ever have darkness. It's that
you've never got to the point where
the benefits of your life are so great that they never ever outweigh any of the negatives that you've ever had.
You've never got to the point where you started thinking of ending your life as the solution.
Yeah. Where you really felt like you had nothing. Where you really felt like this, that was it. Like, like everything that you've experienced in life has been subpar, and you'll never experience anything great. Either ever again or just ever. That exists. Like, there are lots of people out there that don't feel, and I know because I used to be one of them, that even though I had done a bunch of shit, so that's a weird thing. Like, I know what it feels like to, I mean, I have anxiety disorder myself, so I know what it's like to have a mental disorder, and I know what it's like to actually do things that are fun but feel like you got nothing out of it. And that's a weird thing. It's a really weird thing. And I know, and now I can see it from both sides. So I know what it's like to go through that and still feel like you've done nothing, but then see how wrong that is. To actually, like, reflect back on it and be like, I've lived a very unique and accomplished life and done a lot.
Yeah.
And everything else is just the fiction that you're telling yourself in momentary circumstances.
I think that's where the shock comes from when you're talking about prominent figures in society who in their lives is people think, well, they've done so much. Like, how can they not find fulfillment? And that should be an indication to you that you should pursue the things that you actually care about and give you happiness, because you can make yourself an amazing career, but if you're not passionate about it, you don't care about it, you will not find fulfillment.
Yeah.
Even if it's giving you praise by others all the time. That void is going to eat at you.
Yep.
Doesn't matter how far you make it in life. And there's people that have, they don't have a name to themselves. They're not making a whole lot of money, but they're happier than a whole lot of other people. Yep. Maybe they're just doing something they're happy and content with.
Yeah, that's actually, and this could end up being a whole other podcast, but the idea of achieving being content and doing what you want in life, I think, are two key components to it. They're vital to your mental well-being, and I just discovered that probably within the last 3 years. I went through masters, and it was a dark time for me.
Preach.
Yeah. It was just like I was having huge panic attacks and things. And I had no idea what was going on with me. I had no idea that I had an anxiety disorder, and that goes back into communication too. Like, you don't know how to communicate with yourself to the point where you don't even recognize that you're anxious.
Yeah.
And so all that gets, connecting with the self or whatever. But doing things that you love to do and that you want to do is vital to your well-being. And that gets pinned against selfishness, because why are you being selfish right at that point for choosing yourself? But I think the reality is that most people are selfish. The vast majority of people are selfish. And that doesn't mean you have to be as selfish as a lot of them, but you do still need to find a way to treat yourself like you're another person. Give yourself the same consideration that you would give anybody else, because if you're not doing that, you definitely won't be happy.
It's hard. I think it's hard for people to do that because they do know themselves somewhere, and they're like, well, they devalue themselves because they know about their own secrets or their own darknesses, and they can't bring themselves to treat themselves the way that they would treat another person, because they find the good in others.
Yeah, because you don't talk about the bad, so other people don't talk about the bad, so you only ever see the good. And so they come out looking sterling, and you come out looking, well, I know all the stuff that I think. None of that's, like you don't deserve it or whatever, or all the things that I do. Or
something I raised at the beginning was, I mentioned decay of culture in the United States. Do you think that that's, from just, do you think that that's a cause of the increase in suicide, or are people losing their? I know that people are losing value. They see a loss of value in work that they do. I think in generations past, they felt like the things that I'm doing, there's value. I'm contributing to something, right? Maybe the country, or this product that I produce does good in the world. But work is losing its value. Mm-hmm. And cultures, communities are not as tight-knit as they used to be. There's kind of this feels like an unraveling. Certainly in our political environment, there's evidence that there's cultural decay. And I have to wonder how much that has to do with the suicide rate.
Yeah, lots. We could talk about the kind of the biggest thing for people in terms of depression with any country is not the amount of wealth that they have, but the disparity between wealth. And that just makes perfect sense, because what you end up having is a group of people that can compare themselves to other people that have more than them. But the thing is, in American society, we view money as value of a person. We do. There are a bunch of studies showing that we equate a lot of times the value of an individual with their wealth or prosperity. So if you don't have that going on for you to some degree, you take that as an evaluation of the self, and that's bound to cause lots of different.
And an interesting thing in American society too is I don't know if it's like this in countries in Europe or something, but in the U.S., there's disparities between classes can be really in your face. I just came from Portland, and you could be on the street in downtown Portland, right, and you see all these homeless people walking around. There's a huge homeless population in Portland, and then you walk a block into a neighborhood, and there's houses with 3-car garages. You know, they're beautiful gardens, and it's right there next to all the homeless people. And so that disparity is really in your face, and you're confronted with that on a daily basis. So if you don't have those things, you're constantly confronted with, like, I guess I have not done enough to get to where they are, or I've been, life has treated me different. The cards have been different for me.
And that's also the narrative that's pushed too. So if you ask, like, well, why don't I have that?
Yeah.
Well, you're just young, and or I've heard that before.
Yeah, the American dream is, if you work hard enough, you can achieve, insert the thing that you want, right?
Bill
insert
O'Reilly's
the thing that you're passionate about.
Little spiel.
And I think there's some truth to that, I think it is true that if you're willing to, like, just grind, like just push yourself until you achieve the goal that you want, I think you do get your dreams.
I think you're just doing it for a shot. I don't think you're doing it to achieve your dreams.
Nothing's a guarantee.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll take a step back on that. But the thing is that some people have to work a whole lot harder, a whole lot harder. And if it's to a point where they feel hopeless, well, then it's like, well, what do you do?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No. That idea always gets to me, because it's like, I've had a job since I was 13 years old.
Yeah.
Like, I've always had a job. I've actually had a job before that, but I was getting paid in candy, so that doesn't count. But I started working at an auto mechanic shop when I was 13, and I've had a job since. And they've always not been easy. They've always been really difficult, and they've been for really crappy pay. And it's like, I don't have nothing, so I guess I also need to say that it's I'm not necessarily.
You're doing okay.
Yeah, I'm doing all right. But the point is, I don't feel financially stable. I guess I'll say that. I don't feel like I am to the point where I can not worry about money hardly at all. Like, I still have to panic about it on a pretty much daily basis. Like, so that's still where I'm at. And but this is coming from a person who's always had a full-time job at that, who's been de-icing planes in negative 20-degree weather, and throwing around huge bags, doing auto mechanic work on stuff when they didn't train us to do it. I've worked at prisons. Like, I've done a lot of crazy intense things, to not be financially stable. And it's just like, I do think we need to get past the notion that hard work correlates as much as we think to those things. I've done a lot of disgusting things. I've cleaned out, when I was cleaning out garages, it's like, we would have those deep freezers full of fish, and guess who was cleaning it out?
You are.
The new guy. Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, I've always had landscaping jobs, or I've always been doing very physical things, very physical
work.
Yeah. And it just doesn't work like that. It does. And that was while going to college. That's the other thing. Just get your education.
It sounds like, the direction that we're going is, if we're talking about suicide, we need an environment where there's always some measure of hope.
Yeah.
Some belief that there's a upward momentum.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like that doesn't exist for a lot of people. That possibility of hope.
Yeah.
There are lots of hopeless communities. And
we were talking about this last podcast too, but retirement funds and, all those.
Yeah, people have been working again, you're going back to this American myth that you can work a job. It's one of the myths of America, kind of like post-World War II, is that, like, you work a job for 20 years, and you can retire at the end of it and be secure, be comfortable, buy your RV, go travel with your wife around the country, and hang out with the grandkids until your day comes. But so people still, like, that myth exists, but the reality is that the myth doesn't translate into reality, really. There's just like a short period of time where that existed. but it was ingrained in us that it was going to be that way for us as well. And so people are working jobs where they're not going to have a retirement. There's no like they're going to have to hope that the structures in society change, or their kids love them enough to take care of them when they're older. So I don't know. We need some type of structure where there's more hope for people, I guess.
Yeah. And then, I think it just all goes back to like, where are we at and when is enough? And because, I mean, it continues to happen. It looks like it's just getting more extreme in terms of suicide and other things. It's getting better, but in just that one, it's getting more extreme. And
yeah, it's weird, right? Because in American society, like, I mean, if you had to compare it to other parts of history, you would probably things are pretty damn good right now, right?
Yeah.
We got a lot going for us, and we have made efforts to make welfare systems better for people. They're not perfect. I mean, our welfare systems in the United States have a lot of problems, right? But the intention behind them was to like help fellow human beings out, right?
Yeah.
They're not perfect, but a lot of those things didn't exist in the past. So the question becomes like, why do things seem better, but people are living responding to the society that they live in with more drastic demonstrations of how they feel. Like they're ending their own lives. I mean, we see like the mass shootings going on, and that's like a new phenomenon. I mean, they've happened in small bits in the past, but I mean, we're really like unprecedented territory at this point.
Yeah.
In a lot of different aspects of our culture. So, I mean, it's just a weird distinction that things seem better, but the symptoms are not an indication that that's the truth.
Yeah, I think I'm going to approach this from maybe a more controversial direction.
Let's do it.
Which is that a lot of it has to do with social comparison. But the idea before was that, and I could be wrong about this, but I'm just going to say it anyway, people didn't expect as much out of their own lives previously to a certain point. It's just like you knew what you were going to do and you lived it and you died and you went to heaven. That was your narrative, and that was okay with you. Whereas now we've been pitched, no, you can do it. You can create your dreams and this and that, and you'll be okay. And then when things don't work out that way, that's highly aggravating.
It is scary. I feel that.
Yeah. Like when you're told, so you're pitched this liberal narrative all day that like, we're supposed to be living in an open society of love and caring for one another and openness. And the reality is I've been bullied by hippie chicks before. Like that's
I'm
the
not
reality.
laughing at you. I'm just,
no.
I did laugh at you, but I'm not laughing.
But yeah, I mean, that's, that happens.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what, where's all that? And it's something that we talk about. It's something that we like the idea of, but we haven't figured out quite how to manifest it.
Yeah.
And that contradiction there creates turmoil in certain people's lives because they're told, no, you're supposed to value yourself, but then you're told not to value yourself, essentially, through other ways. So you're getting this double communication, because I've heard my whole life you're supposed to value yourself or this and that. And then it's just like, well, I believe that, but when your teacher doesn't seem to value you, when your family doesn't seem to value you, when your job doesn't seem to value you, it's just like that there's this contradiction there that is hard to reconcile for some people.
Yeah, that is really hard. I mean, I feel that.
Yeah.
I come up with a million schemes every other day. And things that I've pursued, sometimes they haven't worked out. And I like the distinction that you drew, that I definitely think there's something to that.
Yeah, because I mean we're told to follow our dreams, and a lot of people are trying to, and then looking back, like even for me, like sometimes I am like I just wish somebody would have told me to be like a garbage man or something, like I wish I could have just done that, but then it's just like, well, now I'm not valuing the person I am today, even though I really do. Like I feel really like I've grown. I feel like I would not be at the level that I am mentally or spiritually or physically if I had done that. That's just the way that I feel. Not that garbage people can't do that. I'm just saying, for me, it took education and going into a field that allowed me to explore very deep questions that allowed me to
The danger of that is
feel so fulfilled.
Yeah, and the danger of that is you're always going to be confronted with failure because you're always challenging yourself.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And sometimes failure can be catastrophic, depending on what kind of risks or challenges you're taking on in your life.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. There's a lot to sort out.
Yeah, and we can loop all this back to communication too, just in terms of there needing to be more programs out there. Yeah, I mean, there needs to be more out there for people to. We need a society in which people feel open to express themselves to a certain degree, and even maybe to a full degree. Like, why not? We have so many restrictions. That could be where this goes, and maybe we should save this for another podcast. But like self-expression and being able to kind of like express who you see yourself as is heavily hindered as well.
I think that's happening in society right now.
Yeah, where it's coming out.
Some of it's very extreme.
Yeah,
and so for a lot of people that they're nerved, they don't feel comfortable with that. But I actually do see that we're moving in a direction where people are just like, this is who I am, and being very vocal about that. There's reactions against that because it's kind of like, well, what society do you want? Do you want a balance between individualism and collectivism? Do you want more of an individual society, more of a collective conformist type society? And so you see the push and pull in that. I think in American culture right now.
Yeah, I agree with that too, but I do think that we just need to get to the point where we ask, like, are they really hurting anybody? Is this person really hurting anybody by expressing themselves? And if these answers really no, if the best that you have is that it insults you, then that's not good enough. So you just need to get over that, because I think in the long run it will be mentally healthy for everyone to be able to express themselves to full capacity, as long as they're not hurting anybody else. But we're not there either.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Is there anything else you want to dive into in regards to?
I feel like there is, but let me think for a second. Yeah, I mean, I guess. Oh, we're going to post suicide prevention probably on the post or something like that.
Yeah, we can put that information out there.
Okay. Yeah, because that's the best we could do, and I think maybe to just like have a moment of like a genuine message, because like life is really hard. Like for some people, for many people, it's very difficult. And I'm not a person who likes to tell people how to live their lives or what to do. And I do think that what you're going through, or what anybody's going through, like, nobody can identify with that. Like, nobody, like, you're the only one that's ultimately going to get what you're going through. And that's a burden. But that doesn't mean that it's all bad, And so I guess that's the best in terms of like this conversation and getting something out there that I feel like maybe somebody could relate to, is that they're keep problem solving, essentially. You know, like, okay, so for instance, like I've seen therapists before, or there's online communities that you can reach out to. But like, if you really are struggling, be sure to exhaust every option first. And you're gonna have to help. You're gonna have to help yourself, essentially.
A resource that a lot of people probably don't think about that's actually can be useful is Reddit, like the website.
Yeah. Could also be a bad thing, though, probably, right?
Well, I mean, the
Depending
trolls
on what
exist
section you're in.
everywhere, but I mean, there are subreddits called like Off My Chest, where people can just like share what they need to share. I know for veterans, like if you were to get on like the Army or the Navy, the Marine Corps subreddits, and you were talking about like needing help as a veteran, like there are people in that community that'll be like, hey, you can, like, if you need to talk to someone, you can PM me, private message me, or call me, like, and they'll do that.
Yeah.
Those resources, they're not like official resources, but they exist. Like if you just need to talk to another, because some people just need to talk to another human being, like they just need that interaction, they need to speak what they're feeling. And it's not as complicated as having to build an institution for that person to get the help that they need. But yeah, that's just I'm just throwing that out there because I've seen, like, watching online, like people like ask for help, and I've seen people have like get that help from getting on Reddit and being like, hey, like for soldiers, because I frequent the Army subreddit a lot, just because I like to keep tabs on what's going on in the Army. And I like, you can see posts on there of people getting online like, hey, one of my buddies got killed today and like not feeling too good. And then people pop, hey man, you need to talk to somebody, you call me. I see it all the time.
Yeah.
So I think what you said is useful, is like really exhaust every effort, stay alive.
Yeah,
like,
because the internet, man, is just there. You have more resources than anybody ever, you know, and it just doesn't seem like it because you're not thinking about it, you know. There's so many that you're almost not thinking about, but the internet is such a vast place, and yes, you have to be careful with the way you navigate it. But there are a lot of people on it, and there are a lot of different things out there, and so just kind of allowing technology and, again, those communication skills to work in your benefit. And one thing that we didn't talk about, that I don't want to talk about too in depth, but just to cover it so you know it's on there, is we didn't talk about to what proportion, I don't know if that matters at all, but to what proportion communication can help in relation to other things. So for instance, like as opposed to medical, what am I thinking? Medicinal. Yeah, like medicinal.
Taking a pill if you're feeling depressed or something.
Right. And we could talk about the pros and cons of that, but I have people who have mental illness who swear up and down that you should be taking medication. Like they just say that there's no way that they could function without it. And me, okay, yeah, so just I'll try to wrap this up really quickly because we're running on here, but I guess one thing that I wanted to express about myself is what's interesting to me in my own venture in terms of mental illness, and I've been through a lot too, is that most of my progression mentally has been for logical reasons. It's been for directly communicative components. So for instance, I used to have panic attacks all the time. And then I went to the doctor, and the doctor told me I couldn't die of a panic attack. And I immediately stopped having panic attacks. I couldn't have them after that. But I've talked to other people who have anxiety disorder or depression or anything like that, and they're like, it just doesn't work like that. For them, there seems to be some chemical component. So I don't know. And then I don't know if it's just because I identify with the words you can't die from that, and there's just something they're not understanding about that. So there could still be a communicative component. But a lot of what I've seen in terms of progress has been from communicative. I don't take any medication whatsoever. And I would prefer not to if I could. But the best things that have happened to me have been because of communication. I guess that's my little, I don't know what you would call that, my little pitch in terms of communication. And that doesn't mean that you don't need medication. And unfortunately, we are working with a system and with a government that isn't there yet in terms of giving people the help that they need,
Yeah.
or getting people the help that they need. So that's not always an option for people, but the internet is a great place, and utilize every corner and facet of it. If you can't, well, no, just do it anyway. But especially if you can't get actual therapeutic help, if you can't afford it, or medication.
Yeah, give yourself every chance that you have.
Yeah.
And because there's probably people in your life, even if you don't realize it, that would want you to give yourself every chance.
Yeah. It doesn't always feel like that.
Yeah.
It doesn't, but there are still people, and this is the only one you get, to me, in my head. That's the way that I view it. You know, it's
life, you mean?
Yeah. Like, this is the only life that you know about that you're going to get. Maybe you got another one coming around the corner, but it is a maybe. And so just see where it goes, basically. I guess that's always been the thing for me. I've had depressive moments before, you know, episodes closer to my teenage years, but still. And I think one thing that can help is just like, you don't know where this is going. Tomorrow can always be different.
Yeah.
And it's the only one you got. So just try to. Meditation is going to be a great resource. And
meditation is a huge resource.
Oh, yeah. It's a game changer for sure. So if you do not meditate and you have mental health issues, certainly incorporate it into your daily routine, because it can make you so much more aware of yourself, and it can make you calmer. UCLA has great guided meditations, which I'll put links in the description box for that as well.
I've had a lot of students that have tried to hurt themselves and commit suicide, and I have a question that I tend to pose to a lot of them, and I don't, I'm not saying it's useful every time, but a question I've often asked is like, how many happy moments have you had since then? And sometimes they'll say, I'm never happy, but there are people that have said, like, they tell me a memory that was like, I did this with my mom or my dad or someone that I love, right? And I'm like, well, those things still exist in your future, those good moments. And then they start to realize that, had I been successful in what I was trying to do, those moments would not be there. So
yep.
Yeah, finding a way to stick around and sort out your problems so that you can find those good moments in life in the future.
Yeah, sometimes it's best to just observe life and not feel the need to judge it so much, but just let it be. That's really helped, I feel like, a lot of people, because we can get into something we probably should have gotten into, but we didn't. But just the idea that there are people who are in very adverse conditions that are still very happy. Like, those are the people, and you ask what makes them different, and a lot of it has to do with awareness. A lot of it has to do with them being very aware of themselves and their surroundings.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why meditation helps. And I think there's something about, I've had tough moments in my life where I just act like it's a movie. Like I'm watching a movie, and it removes you from it to the point where it just doesn't become as extreme.
And because I know what you're saying, but I want to clarify something, and just because if the audience misinterprets it, you're not saying that it's good to like look at someone in an adverse situation and be like, well, I've got it better than them. That's not what you're saying.
No, it's not. No, it's that person as an individual is a very fulfilled and happy individual with less. Yeah. And so the point is that you can do that. There's stories of Socrates basically being out in very cold weather when he was in the Greek military. I'm not sure what it was called, but he was known for just standing out in the freezing cold and being completely content and okay, and not eating for days on end, and just just completely chill, And some of those are fables, but there are people, or you talk about the monks on where was it? Help me out, Jay. The monks on Tiananmen Square.
Yeah.
That set themselves on fire.
Yeah.
And did not that you should self-immolate. But they didn't scream, And so there's something to be had in removing yourself from the conditions that you're unfortunately forced to face because of an underdeveloped society, or a society that just hasn't gotten there yet.
Well, you want to call it there?
Yeah, dude, I think that's great.
All right. Well, again, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to listen to us. If you want to give us feedback, we're definitely open to that. We want to hear what you have to say. If you are, feeling in places of despair, go get help. Yeah, for sure. And you're listening to the Currency of Discourse podcast with myself, Jay, and Quaid, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Have a nice night.